Welcome. Today, we're diving into the rich, complex, and often tense history of U.S. China relations. This relationship spans over 2 centuries, shaping both countries and influencing the world. But how did it all start, and what led us to the current state of competition and interdependence? Let's begin this journey to understand how the past has shaped today's superpower rivalry. Our story of U.S.-China relations begins in the late 18th century, soon after the American Revolution. Newly independent, the United States sought to establish economic ties beyond Europe. China, with its ancient culture and valuable goods like silk, porcelain, and tea, was an attractive trade partner. The trade grew, and American merchants regularly traveled to Chinese ports like Guangzhou. By the 19th century, Chinese goods were highly sought after in the U.S., and Chinese immigration grew, especially during the California Gold Rush in the 1850s. Chinese immigrants played a vital role in building the Transcontinental Railroad, yet their arrival soon stirred controversy and resistance in the U.S. This led to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first significant law restricting immigration to the U.S. based solely on nationality or ethnicity. The act barred Chinese laborers from entering the U.S., marking the beginning of decades of discrimination against Chinese communities in America. Tensions were not only domestic. Back in China, resentment toward foreign influence grew as Western powers, including the U.S., pushed for trading privileges and territory in Chinese ports. This resistance culminated in the Boxer Rebellion in 1899, a nationalist uprising aimed at expelling foreign powers from China. In response, an international coalition that included the U.S. intervened militarily to suppress the rebellion. The intervention deepened distrust between China and the West, but also demonstrated the growing influence of the U.S. on the world stage. As we move into the 20th century, the relationship between the U.S. and China became more strategic, particularly during World War II. By the 1930s, Japan had launched an aggressive campaign in China, leading to the Second Sino-Japanese War. Horrific events like the Nanjing Massacre drew global attention, and China found itself in desperate need of support against Japanese forces. In response, the U.S. formed a critical alliance with China to curb Japanese expansion in Asia. American support for China, led by Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government, included military aid, strategic advice, and notably, the deployment of the Flying Tigers, an American volunteer air squadron that played a pivotal role in assisting Chinese forces. This alliance was also significant for American domestic policy, as it led to the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1943. The U.S. government aimed to strengthen its partnership with China by easing restrictions on Chinese immigration and improving diplomatic relations. At this point, Americans began to see China not just as a distant trading partner, but as an ally and a symbol of resistance against fascism. However, the end of World War II brought new tensions. Following Japan's defeat, China descended into a civil war between the nationalist forces, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the communist forces, led by Mao Zedong. By 1949, Mao declared the founding of the People's Republic of China, and the nationalists fled to Taiwan. With the advent of the Cold War, the U.S. viewed Mao's communist government as a major threat to its democratic allies in Asia, marking the beginning of decades of mutual suspicion, competition, and ideological opposition between the U.S. and the newly established People's Republic of China. With the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, the United States and China found themselves on opposite sides of the Cold War divide. Mao Zedong's alliance with the Soviet Union and China's communist government posed a significant challenge to U.S. interests in Asia. And for the first 2 decades of the Cold War, there was minimal direct engagement between the U.S. and China. The Korean War in the early 1950s became the first flashpoint. Chinese forces intervened to prevent the defeat of North Korea, putting them directly at odds with the United States, which supported South Korea. This brutal conflict reinforced the hostility and mistrust between the two nations, leading to the perception of China as a primary threat to U.S. interests in Asia. As the Cold War continued, China's relationship with the Soviet Union began to fracture, particularly over ideological differences and competition for influence. The Sino-Soviet split in the 1960s opened a strategic window for the U.S. to recalibrate its approach to China. Leaders in the U.S. saw an opportunity to leverage this split to shift the global balance of power. President Richard Nixon and his national security advisor Henry Kissinger spearheaded this groundbreaking strategy. In 1972, Nixon's visit to China marked a historic turning point. It was the first time an American president had set foot in the People's Republic of China, symbolizing a thaw in relations and the start of ping-pong diplomacy. Nixon met with Chairman Mao and Premier Zhou Enlai, laying the groundwork for a diplomatic relationship that would reshape global geopolitics. For China, this rapprochement provided an opportunity to open up to the world, eventually leading to reforms that would drive its rapid economic growth. This diplomatic breakthrough allowed the U.S. to balance against Soviet power by positioning China as a counterweight. For China, engaging with the U.S. was an essential step toward modernization and development. By the late 1970s, China began adopting economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping, marking the beginning of its path to becoming an economic powerhouse. Through strategic diplomacy during the Cold War, the U.S. managed to reduce the influence of the Soviet Union and create an opening for a more constructive relationship with China. These shifts not only altered U.S. China relations, but also played a crucial role in the eventual end of the Cold War and China's emergence onto the global stage. By the 1990s, China was undergoing rapid industrialization, and the world took notice. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, solidifying its position in the global economy. American companies began manufacturing goods in China, benefiting from low labor costs, while China gained access to the U.S. market. This mutual economic benefit led to what some called Chimerica, a fusion of the two economies, with the U.S. buying vast amounts of Chinese goods and China investing heavily in American debt. Today, the relationship between the United States and China remains complex and competitive, with technology and trade at the forefront of their interactions. Both countries are vying for economic dominance, and this competition has led to several high-profile conflicts and policy shifts that illustrate their respective interests and concerns. One of the most significant areas of tension is technology. The United States has taken multiple steps to limit China's access to advanced semiconductor technology, essential for everything from smartphones to military hardware. Semiconductors are critical to the global tech supply chain, and the U.S., along with allies like Japan and the Netherlands, has restricted the export of advanced chips and manufacturing equipment to China. These actions are intended to prevent China from advancing in critical areas like artificial intelligence and quantum computing, technologies that could shift the balance of military and economic power. Another notable example is the U.S. stance on Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei. Since 2018, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on Huawei, citing national security concerns over potential espionage risks. American officials have also encouraged allied countries to exclude Huawei technology from their 5G networks, fearing that Chinese companies might use their technological reach to monitor or disrupt communication infrastructure. This campaign against Huawei not only limits China's 5G influence, but also reflects broader concerns over China's role in critical digital infrastructure globally. The social media platform TikTok has also been a point of contention. With over 1 billion users worldwide, TikTok has faced scrutiny in the U.S. over concerns that user data might be accessible to the Chinese government. The U.S. government has proposed potential bans and even forced divestiture of TikTok's U.S. operations unless changes are made to limit Chinese influence. This situation illustrates how, in the digital age, influence over information and user data is a key area of competition between the two superpowers. Economic tensions are also evident in the ongoing trade disputes. The U.S. has imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, aiming to reduce the U.S. trade deficit with China and counter what it sees as unfair trade practices. China has retaliated with tariffs on American products, leading to a tit-for-tat trade war that has impacted global supply chains and affected industries from agriculture to manufacturing. While some progress has been made, underlying issues such as intellectual property concerns and government subsidies in strategic sectors continue to fuel economic rivalry. These issues in technology and trade reveal a broader trend in U.S. China relations. While both countries are economically interdependent, each views the other as a strategic competitor, particularly in fields that influence global power dynamics. As both nations invest heavily in emerging technologies, their competition could shape the future of innovation, cybersecurity, and even global economic stability. In today's world, the United States and China represent two competing poles of influence. This dynamic is reshaping global alliances and often framing international events as part of a larger struggle between Western democratic systems and Eastern state-led models. The U.S. maintains a network of alliances through NATO and partnerships with countries in Asia, while China is focused on extending its influence through infrastructure investment, trade, and diplomatic outreach, especially through its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. The Belt and Road Initiative is a prime example of China's strategy to grow its global influence. Launched in 2013, this ambitious project aims to build a vast network of trade routes and infrastructure investments spanning Asia, Africa, and Europe. Through the BRI, China has been able to secure strategic partnerships with over 140 countries, many of which rely on Chinese loans and expertise for development projects like ports, railways, and energy plants. While the BRI has led to economic growth in several regions, it has also raised concerns over potential debt traps and increased dependence on China, positioning Beijing as a central player in global trade and logistics. In response, the U.S. and its allies have been working to counterbalance China's influence, especially in critical areas like military alliances, trade agreements, and technology standards. The United States Indo-Pacific strategy, for instance, aims to strengthen its presence in Asia through alliances with countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and India. The U.S. has also been promoting initiatives like the Blue Dot Network to provide alternative investment opportunities for countries that seek infrastructure support without aligning too closely with China. This geopolitical struggle extends to technology and cyber infrastructure, as both countries strive to set global standards in 5G, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. As discussed earlier, Huawei's role in global 5G networks has become a symbol of this broader rivalry, with the U.S. urging allied countries to avoid Chinese technology for critical infrastructure. The stakes are high. Whichever country leads in technological standards could shape the future of digital security, data sovereignty, and even military communications worldwide. In many ways, this rivalry resembles a new Cold War, though with key differences. Unlike the ideological divide between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, the U.S.-China relationship is highly interconnected economically. While tensions are high, both nations are also major trading partners, creating a complex interdependence that shapes global markets. Yet, as China's influence grows in regions traditionally aligned with the U.S., from Africa to Latin America, the question of global leadership remains unsettled. This competitive dynamic not only affects diplomatic and economic policies, but also raises questions about the future of international governance. How will these two powers coexist on the world stage? Will they find areas for cooperation, or will their differences push the world toward greater polarization? For smaller countries caught between these superpowers, the U.S. China rivalry represents both an opportunity and a challenge, as they seek to navigate these shifting allegiances and safeguard their own national interests. To wrap up, the relationship between the U.S. and China is complex, shaped by centuries of change, cooperation, and competition. How this relationship evolves will impact not just these two nations, but the entire world. What do you think lies ahead for the U.S. and China? Will they find common ground, or are we headed toward more conflict? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth discussions on world affairs.